Hey, it's Bradley. Welcome to Firewall. We've got a special live episode for you guys, and it features professor, investor, podcast host, impressionario, the wonderful Scott Galloway. I was lucky enough to interview Scott in front of a sold-out crowd about his new book, The Algebra of Wealth, here at P&T Knitwear. It is a fantastic book. It is full of great lessons, and this episode is full of great stories from Scott on how he's built his companies, his wealth, and most importantly, his character. So I love this interview, and I hope you guys enjoy it too. So welcome, everybody. This is definitely the best crowd we've ever had at P&T Knitwear, so I am really excited. You should know, this is the only time in the 2 years we've had the store where people have texted me and said, hey, can you hook me up with a ticket? It's sold out. That never happens for these kinds of events, so thank you. We're here to talk about Scott's new book, The Algebra of Wealth. Not sure how many of you had a chance to read it yet. Obviously just came out. But I would imagine that, is anyone here not a Prof G listener? Who would have the balls to raise their hand and say that at this point, even if they're not? That guy right there. If you like the podcast, the book feels like you're just listening to the podcast for an extended period of time. That same voice, that same kind of narrative tone, the same logic, the same irreverence, the same vulnerability and honesty that I think makes Scott's podcast so effective and everything else he does so effective is exactly what you get in this book too. So I think you're really going to like it. So when I was going through it, I wrote way too many. I think I came up with over 40 questions for you. So that's way too many. So I'm cut it down to stuff that I'm interested in, which may or may not be what you feel like talking about. But let's start with these, and then I'll kick it over to the audience. So you write, find something you're good at that people will pay you for and go really, really hard at it. Spend less than you make so you can deploy a platoon, then a division, then an army of capital that fights for you and your loved ones while you sleep. Diversify so you can endure the unknown that surrounds us and have a long-term perspective. Embrace the wisdom to recognize time will go faster than you think. And goes on to eventually end. This is the whole shooting match, which is pretty much the end of the book. How long did it take you to realize this? And given that a lot of people in the audience are younger than you and me, how can they internalize and kind of get to that perspective faster than it took you to get there?
First off, Brad, thanks for having me. Thanks for everybody. Whenever I walk into a crowd like this, I wonder when it's all going to end. I wonder when I'm finally going to say something really stupid, or people are going to find out that I'm not the person I portrayed that I am. Look, it took me the better part of 20 years post-college to realize, quite frankly, how many terrible mistakes I had made financially, and as a result, the amount of emotional and mental anguish I put myself through, probably unnecessarily. And the motivation or the inspiration for the book was, that study that says that you are your 5 friends? There's this crazy study showing that the 4 people you hang out with most, you become their same body mass index, you become their same politics, root for the same teams, live in the same place, and shockingly earn about the same amount of money. But amongst those 5 people, there's a greater variance in who ends up wealthy and not wealthy. Of those 5, 1 will end up financially stressed, 3 will be fine, and 1 will end up wealthy. So I got fascinated with the notion of what are the behaviors of people who end up much wealthier than their peers who made the same amount of money. And I decided, and I started thinking about it, and I tried to distill stuff down to an equation. My class is a series of charts because humans have a difficult time, or a much easier time, holding on to constructs. And if you're a teacher, what you want is you want some resonance. You want people in their careers and their lives to be able to pull out something and have it be useful. So essentially the equation or the calculus or the geometry, and everyone's like, why did you call it calculus? Anyway, is find your talent. I'm a big believer in that the worst advice you can get is to follow your passion. The person telling you to follow your passion is already rich. And typically that person has made their billions in iron ore smelting. And young people can often mistake their hobbies for their passion. And I think your 20s is about workshopping and trying to find something that you could be great at, that you could be in the top 10%. That, and this is the key point, has a 90+% employment rate. There are 180,000 actors in SAG-AFTRA. These are the most talented actors in the world. It's not easy to get into the union. And of the 180,000, 87% don't have health insurance because they didn't make more than $23,000 last year. So your return on your invested capital, and there's a lot of young people here, the capital you have is time. The return on your invested capital is inversely correlated to how sexy the industry is. If you want to be a chef, a model, an athlete, an actor, open nightclubs, be a DJ, you better get bright green signals almost right away that you are in the top 1%, if not the top 0.1. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for a life of frustration. You should absolutely pursue those professions if you have rich parents. If you don't, I meet documentary filmmakers all the time, and I'm like, oh, okay, so you're rich. If you don't have rich parents, what I would suggest is if you get into an industry where you think you can be great, and this isn't easy. I thought I was going to be a pediatrician when I was 18 applying to college. Chemistry disabused me of that notion. I thought I was going to be an athlete in high school. UCLA athletics disabused me of that notion. When I got out of UCLA, I thought I was going to be an investment banker. 2 years in fixed income at Morgan Stanley told me that this isn't for you. So I kept workshopping stuff until I found something I thought, well, I think I could be great at this. And then your job is to invest the requisite 10th hours of grit, enduring bullshit, rejection, try to get certified, try and aggregate allies such that you might be someday in the top 10%. And being in the top 10% of something that has a high employment rate and discovering the mastery of it, the economic accoutrements, the camaraderie, the prestige, the relevance, the broader selection set of mates than you deserve, all of these things will make you passionate about whatever it is. Mastery and getting prestige and getting economic security is an amazing thing. I am so passionate about taking care of my kids stress-free. I can't even imagine, well, I can't imagine, but when I was sitting in the delivery room and my oldest had the poor judgment to come marching out of my girlfriend in 2008 when I had just lost everything. I mean everything. I had negative net worth. You know, I'm worth 30 or 40 million on paper in January of 2008, and by June of 2008, I was worth negative 3 million. And so when my son came out, I had this overwhelming nausea, and everyone thought it was because of childbirth. You know, this guy's never seen a child being born before. That wasn't it at all. It was nausea from this overwhelming sense of failure, that I hadn't lived up to my ultimate obligation to be a good dad right away. You know, that I was failing this kid, because if I'd just been a little bit smarter, I could have saved myself a lot of mental anguish. Anyway, and I'll come to that. Find something you're good at in an industry that has 90+% employment. And by the way, 98% of industries have 90+% employment. And you will be passionate about taking care of your parents. You will be passionate about going to Stagecoach for the first time, which is what I'm doing this weekend. And I don't need to worry or save for it. I am passionate about giving money to things that are important to me. And it makes me passionate about these really boring industries that I'm good at. Analytics, storytelling, right? I mean, I've just gotten really good at a few things that are pretty, not the romance industries. The second part of the equation. So the first thing is your focus. You have to make money to be, at some point, financially secure, again, unless you're born into money. The next thing is kind of what I call Stoicism, and it's actually the wrong word. It's trying to have some maturity, and I didn't have this maturity, to recognize that no one's thinking about your shit as much as you are. That no one's as impressed with that BMW you own as you are. And drive a Hyundai. You don't be the guy late at night that's ordering a bottle of Grey Goose in a club thinking it makes you more attractive to potential mates. It doesn't. Figure out that stuff at a young age, while it's important because you're in your mating years, if you can have some discipline to recognize that other things are more important in life and be able to control your emotions around falling into the trap that every day, the brightest people in the world who are the most well-resourced are declaring war on your instincts. And that is, they're trying to convince you with psychologically tested offers on a screen that you're on 16 hours a day to, at the exact right moment, convince you should upgrade from economy to economy plus to business class, right? To offer you, and this happened to me this morning, I'll get my protein shake from Joe and the Juice and my tuna avocado sandwich, tuna avocado I think it's called, and right at that moment, hey, do you want to add flourless chocolate cake from Balthazar Boulangerie? And I'm like, I love chocolate cake, yes. And that's another $12 plus fees, plus. It is so hard not to spend everything. And every day in a capitalist society, the brightest people in the world are trying to get you to spend more money. And try and have some discipline and realize that things like working out, relationships, self-worth, knowledge are really the most rewarding things, such that you can develop a savings muscle. I'm not suggesting you don't enjoy your youth. Go to music festivals, occasionally buy something stupid. That's fine. That's called youth. But you should at least establish a savings muscle where you think, okay, I understand how much I'm making, and I'm going to spend slightly less than what I make, and understand and connect those dots. A lot of people never form that muscle their entire lives. They just can't even conceive of it. Oh, I have money, it's meant to be spent. They never develop that discipline, such that you can go to the next part of the equation, and that is let time take over. And you need to fight another flaw in the species. How old are you, young man? 28. Okay, realistically, you're thin, you're living in New York, you have good genes, you're probably going to live, likely, this is an insurance company would say, this guy's probably going to live another 75 years. But here's the thing, because of the majority of the time on our planet, our species hasn't lived past 35, it is impossible for young people to wrap their brain around the notion they're going to be here almost another 8 decades. So you don't tap into one of the most powerful sources in the universe, and that is compound interest. And that is, if you can save $200 or $300 a month in your 20s, and then $500, maybe $1,000 a month when you're in your 30s as you start making money, when you get to 60, and you're not there yet, I'm not there yet, I can tell you this, anyone over the age of 40 in here, wow, it's gone really slowly, said no one ever. I cannot tell you, Jesus Christ, hasn't it gone fast? It goes by like in a blink. And the mistake I made so much money in my 20s and 30s, and I always figured out a way to spend most or all of it. And if I had just put a little bit aside, just a little bit, and let the S&P take over, which has gone 11% a year since 2008, and you think, that's not a big deal, 11%? Come on, I can do better than that. I understand crypto, or whatever it is, right? That 11% a year means every 21 years, your investments are up 8-fold. And you don't need to worry about it. You don't need to be a hero. You don't need to find the needle in the haystack. You just buy the entire haystack. And then that leads to my last part of the equation, and that is diversification. And again, this is where I always really screwed up, and I didn't learn this until I was well into my 40s. I started a company called Red Envelope and went public. And I thought, anything I really throw myself at, because I'm very talented. I am. I'm not a humble person. I'm very talented. I work very hard. But I'm like, if I throw myself at a company and it's doing well and it's gone public on the NASDAQ, okay, I'm worth $22 million in Red Envelope stock. What do? I go to the investment bank and say, how do I borrow $10 million against my stock so I can buy more Red Envelope? Because I always thought that to be a real baller, you had to be committed. I wanted to make $100 million. I had control over this. Anything I went all in on was going to be massively successful because, see above, I'm awesome. And what I didn't realize is that success is about 49% of you, and it's about 51% of things you have no control over. The majority of my success is not my fault. Being born in the 60s, a white heterosexual male in California, was like winning the lottery. It really was, for a variety of reasons, and I'll come back to that. But I kept doubling down. I never diversified on anything. So when 2008 happened and the credit crisis happened and Red Envelope's credit line got pulled, and then at the same time, bad news usually has momentum to it. We sent out, during the holidays, we had a software glitch and the label gun went crazy, and we sent 30,000 gifts to the wrong addresses. That's really bad for business. And within 17 days, I went from being worth $22 million in Red Envelope stock to negative $3 million. Because I never thought, well, why don't I just take $3 or $5 million out of Red Envelope and put it in a Brazilian mining company, or put it in Japanese bonds, that regardless of what happens to the e-commerce market in the United States, just in case I start having kids, just in case I don't want to be really mentally stressed, put a little bit of money somewhere else. And diversification is just so incredibly powerful, and I didn't figure this out despite having a degree in economics, being a graduate student. I mean, supposedly I'm the guy that's supposed to understand this stuff. Any one stock has a 50.1% chance of going up on any given day. But if you purchased any 5 stocks in the S&P and you held on to those stocks for 10 years, no one has ever lost money. And what the majority of great investors will tell you, I see Boykin Curry, who's a great investor, what Boykin would tell you is one of the keys to staying wealthy is staying wealthy. It's not losing money. And not only is diversification a fantastic way of getting risk-free return, it's a fantastic way of protecting your mental health. When you go from being very, very wealthy to negative 120% in 11 days, I can tell you that's a really ugly 11 days, and the next 11 months are also really ugly. And sure, if you get lucky, and people will take screenshots with this, and the media loves these stories of Steve Ballmer borrowing more Microsoft stock and Mark Zuckerberg refusing an offer for $10 billion, that's the shit you hear about. You don't hear about the mental anguish of people who decided not to diversify. So what do you want to do? You want to find your talent in your 20s, workshop it, recognize the first thing you pick may not work. It took me 3 or 4 swings at the plate. That's okay. Finding out you don't like something or you're not any good at it is a blessing, so you can move on to something else. Try and live a little bit below your means and just establish a saving muscle in your 20s so you know how to do it and work out that muscle when you start making some money in your 30s. And hopefully find a partner that's on kind of has the same sort of economic values as you. Recognize time is going to go really fast. And if I said to you, I have this magic box, and what feels like an instant, if you figure out a way to put $1,000 in there, I'm going to get you $21,000 back in what feels like an instant. How much money would you put in that magic box? As youth, you have access to that magic box because the next 21 years are going to go really, really fast. And you don't need to be a hero. Just put it in low-cost S&P index funds. And then finally, just diversify. You may not be able to a lot as a young person. You may have to go really all in to buy your first home. If you're an entrepreneur, you have no choice early on to go all in. But the moment you have an opportunity to take some off the table, to diversify a little bit, do it. I now don't put more than 3 to 4% of my net worth in any one thing. And I try and diversify like crazy. I'm in the craziest shit that has almost nothing to do with the other thing. If I have an opportunity to invest in something that feels totally alien, a petroleum refining company in Switzerland, an aircraft maintenance engine company in El Salvador, I love those things. Because if one thing goes to zero, I had an investment go to zero today. And by the way, I think it was the investment I was most excited about. It was a text-based healthcare company focusing on preventive medicine via your phone, baller CEO, tier 1 VC, all these incredibly masters of the universe on the board. Oh my God, so excited. They let me in, they did me a favor, they let me invest, several million of my own money. I could have invested more, but I'm like, I am not investing any more than 3 to 5% in any one thing of my net worth. So when I went to zero today, I'm like, oh, that's a bummer. But I have Kevlar on. Nothing really can really hurt me. It's a nuisance. Oh, that hurt. But I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. Diversification is your Kevlar. Get that Kevlar as soon as possible. A bit of a word salad there, Brad.
No, that's great. So one of the things that you write about is a survey of senior citizens that found that their biggest regret was worrying too much. And you write, the things that you really beat yourself up about, you'll look back and realize they weren't that big of a deal. What should we worry about?
What should we worry about? You should be in great shape. I think we have shamed physicality. 70% of America is obese or overweight, and because the industrial food complex wants to addict you to shitty, fatty, salty food and then hand you over to the industrial diabetes complex, there's a profit motive in convincing people who are overweight that they're finding their truth. I think your health, I think at a young age establishing a real commitment to emotional and physical fitness is hugely important. I think a lot about masculinity. I'm writing a book on it. I think every man under the age of 30 should be able to walk into any room and know that if shit got real, they could kill and eat everybody or outrun them. And I'm at the stage now where I'm focusing on outrunning people. But I think being physically strong,
Pretty sure women can do that too.
most women, it's interesting. I go to CrossFit, and the wonderful thing about CrossFit is we celebrate women's strength as opposed to celebrating women to be, quite frankly, anorexic. We celebrate women who are really, really strong. But I do think that men have an advantage, and I'll come back to this. Men have a lot of disadvantages. As youth, it ends up that while boys are physically stronger, they're mentally and emotionally much weaker. When they lose a male role model, they become much more likely to commit suicide, end up in jail, become addicted, whereas girls have the same outcomes in single-parent homes. So they're actually mentally and emotionally much stronger. And I say this sort of tongue-in-cheek, but when you're young, you really should be worried about establishing outstanding strength, flexibility, emotional and mental health. Take stock, work out 3 to 4 times a week, take stock of what you're eating, find people who make you feel good about yourself, figure out what triggers send you into a dark place, and then start creating a series. I figured out right away, I started with anger and depression, which probably isn't going to shock anybody. But I figured out this is how I get, when I recognize when I'm going into a dark place. I recognize it. I have some triggers that I'm like, oh no, I'm going dark. And I have a few things I do, and I call it SCAFA. The first thing is I sweat. That resets my system. I need to go sweat a lot. C, clean. I eat really clean. I don't eat out for a while. Something about eating out and the salt and all the shit is bad for my mental state being abstinence, not the abstinence you think. I cut out all THC and alcohol, both of which I love, and I use a lot. But when I'm really dark, I just take them out. F is family. I try and stick around my boys because they take me out of my head because they're so demanding and so awful sometimes that I can't just dwell in my own shit. And then A, affection. I tell my boys, I'm not feeling great, and they know that we're supposed to go lie on dad or like throw our legs over them, and I let the dogs up on the couch. Just be affectionate with any other mammal around you. And that helps me snap out of it. But if you really want to be successful in life, I would suggest you really want to workshop and get outstanding at physical and mental fitness at a young age. Because if you let it slip, if you let neuroses turn into depression that recurs, if you become really unhealthy and start convincing yourself that, oh, Uncle Joe lived to 95 and smoked a pack of cigarettes and drank a lot, which means that I'll be healthy. When you get to our age, it just catches up to you, and it makes you much less likely to be able to enjoy your life. Anyways, what you should be worried about is being physically and mentally strong while you have all the advantages. You can get to a 9 on both those things, I think, especially physical at your age. Get to that point, because then there's no choice. It becomes a slow burn down. It's going to get cut. It's going to go down. Do you want to start from a 9 when it starts going down, or do you want to start from a 4? Because you are going to lose a lot of those things as you get older. Anyways, that's what I would worry about if I were younger.
So you talk a lot in the book about sort of time being your most important assets, the real currency, and you explain kind of when you should use your money to buy yourself time and when you shouldn't. Can you talk a little more about how you see that?
So comparative advantage, another famous concept, and that is try and find out something you're really good at, and then try and spend as much time and decision capital on that thing you're good at. Once you have a little bit of money, you probably should hire someone to clean your place and then spend that time either working out or working or socializing, because it's pretty inexpensive to get someone to clean your place, and it'll take 4 to 6 hours. I'm not suggesting, I think it's probably a good idea to clean your own place when you don't have a lot of money. Every Sunday, my mom and I used to clean our house. I think that's good for a kid. I force my kids to do some cleaning. But try and outsource as many unimportant decisions as possible. I no longer pick my clothes. I haven't picked a movie, a vacation. I try and screen out every decision that I'm not great at, so I can focus on the decisions I am good at and really think about the stuff that's matter. that matters, because you only have a certain amount of decision capital, and you want to focus on the things you're really good at. So try and outsource a lot of stuff. I try and do stuff in rote. I try and do stuff at the same time, so there's almost no decision. Anyways.
Cool. So you write at one point, I saw my worth through other people's eyes and believed their criteria for what constituted economic success. And I got those things. I garnered status and found pleasure, but real economic security and lasting happiness eluded me. I didn't know any other way to be. So we all let other people define how we see ourselves. And one of the things you talk about in the book is sort of trying to not do that. What's the best way to build that muscle to resist the temptation that we're all so susceptible to of just defining ourselves through other people's eyes?
I don't know. I think that just takes character, or people around you who love you unconditionally, or reading the philosophers. I think that's difficult. I also think this book is not what should be. This book is what is. I believe America becomes more like itself every day, and that is, it is a loving, generous place if you have money. It is a rapacious, violent place if you don't. Anyone who tells you money can't buy happiness has not read any academic literature. There is a very strong correlation between money and happiness. I'm not saying that's a good thing. It is. That is what America is. And the correlation is the following. Middle-income people are much happier than lower-income people. Rich people are modestly happier than middle-income people. That's the bad news. There is a correlation between money and happiness. The good news is that it tops out, and that is, once you get to a certain point, it's diminishing returns. Now, billionaires are no happier than millionaires. That's also a myth, but they're not a lot happier. And what does that mean? It means that if you're fortunate enough to get to some level of economic security, you got to realize that money is just the ink in your pen. It can write new chapters, it can make certain chapters burn brighter, but it's just a means to an end. And real happiness lies in relationships. It's like, what's the point of money? I get to buy shit, it's fun, I love buying stuff, I'm a total materialist. But the real end game, the ends to the means of making money, is that it reduces and relieves you from the stress that gets in the way of deep and meaningful relationships. 70% of divorce filings are from women. And at the heart of that is not infidelity, it's usually not shared values, it's economic stress on the household that turns every cut into an opportunistic infection. Kids in low-income households have higher resting blood pressure than kids in middle-income households. So I just think at a very early age, you want to commit to some level of economic security. Now, having said that, that doesn't necessarily mean getting to economic security in New York, because, by the way, that is so hard. It's just, the bar here to have any sort of reasonable level of economic security is just insane. So what I'm suggesting is you have an honest conversation, because one of the myths is that wealth is about how much money you make. Not really, it's about how much money you spend. What is wealth? What is rich? I'll give you two examples. I have a close friend who runs the M&A group for a very prestigious investment bank. He makes between, I don't know, 7 and 10 million a year. And because it's all current income, right? It's not money from selling stocks or bonds. It doesn't qualify for capital gains. And it's all current, and it's a big number. He pays about 53% income tax rate. You still think, wow, okay, 3 to 6 million a year, that's pretty good. Between his wife, his 2 kids, his ex-wife, his 2 kids from a previous marriage, his home in the Hamptons, his belief that he's a master of the universe and needs to maintain that perception, his FlexJet card, all this shit, I can tell you, he spends nearly all of it. And the years he doesn't make a lot of money, he spends more than he makes. And I know this firsthand. He is very, very stressed out and worried about what happens when the music stops. My father's going to be 94 in a few months. Between his Social Security and his Royal Navy pension, he was a frogman in the Royal Navy, he makes $52,000 a year in passive income. He gets $4,300 a month. He spends $48,000 a year. He has a modest home. He goes out, his big thrills, he goes out for Mexican food every Friday, swims every day. You know, he loves trivia day at the, all that shit at the senior center. And my dad's that kind of guy. he'll go out for Mexican food, same place every Friday, and he'll ask for his half-finished frozen margarita. He'll ask for it to go. I mean, my dad was that guy. I'm still scarred for it. He used to take me and my friends to movies. He would collect money from them after the movie, and I would just be like, oh, God. But he's rich. Passive income that's greater than your burn is the definition of rich. So part of your plan to get to economic security is having a sober conversation with yourself and your partner around what is the spending side of this equation. Because deciding to move to Akron, Ohio, there's a lot of really happy people in Akron, Ohio, and say, do we have the opportunity to move there and make a decent salary? And what would the number be such that by the time we were 50 or 60, we would definitely have enough money saved such that the interest on that and the return on that, and you can do the estimates of what the expected return would at some point be greater, that passive income, than our burn. That's the definition of rich. And it's okay to say, I don't want to work all the time. I don't want to place the expectations on myself that I need to be a baller and make high hundreds of thousands. If you want to stay in New York and have, say, 2 or 3 kids, you're going to have to make a minimum kind of high 6 figures if you want to live in the city and have 3 kids. I mean, unless you're like, it really can dance in between the raindrops. I left New York because I couldn't afford it. In 2010, with 2 kids, young kids at home, and by the way, I talk about money. I use numbers. People who promote the zeitgeist, so you're not supposed to talk about money, it's nothing but a ploy to keep poor people and middle-income people middle income, such that rich people who have total symmetry of information and know how much everyone makes in their company have asymmetric advantage over you. And it also lowers the expectations we have on rich people because we don't exactly know how much money they're making. I think it's important to talk about real numbers. In 2008, 2009, I was teaching at NYU. My wife was at Goldman. I think we were making probably $600,000 or $800,000 combined. A lot of money, working really hard. A lot of money, a lot of stress, a lot of money. I felt broke. I'm like, this is just kind of humiliating to make this much money and be worried about sending our kids to private school because $58,000 a kid, 2 kids, 116. I got to make $200,000 to send my 2 kids to school. Could have sent them to public, but I'm a narcissist and I want a prestige brand. So we moved to Florida and immediately cut our expenses by probably 40, maybe even 50%. And it was like a giant sigh. And by the way, it comes at a trade-off. Delray Beach is not nearly as cool as Manhattan. And I had to commute to New York Sunday to Thursday night, which took a real toll on me. I didn't get to see my boys during the week. But the trade-off was I was able to get to some level of financial security much sooner. So my point is, wealth is knowing that at some point you're going to have passive income greater than your burn, which means saving money, which means an honest conversation around your burn. People are so focused on their top line, but they're not as focused as they should be on their burn. At your age, you should all be here. The most opportunity is in cities. 2/3 of economic growth is going to happen in 20 cities over the next 30 years. This is the place to bump into professional and personal opportunities. But it's okay to, at some point, have an honest conversation around, all right, how do I get to economic security and mental health by moving to a place where I can get to a point where my passive income is going to be greater than its burn. The majority of people can't stay in New York for that. This is a training ground. And then people leave about the time they have kids. And there's absolutely no shame in that at all.
So I'm going to ask you one more question for me, and then I'm going to turn over to the audience. And it's kind of a weird one, but you did inspire it. So you write, I carried an imaginary scorecard with me everywhere into my 40s. Any slight rudeness or lack of respect needed to be countered with an equivalent counterpunch to make the world right again. God, what a waste of energy. Don't make that mistake. You don't know what's going on with that person. Maybe they just got fired, filed for divorce, or found out their kid has diabetes. Or maybe they're just cruel. Who cares? You shouldn't. You don't need to respond to every slight, every small injustice. So the thesis that I've kind of been mulling over is, when we think, okay, what traits do we want to ultimately be successful, which we think will then bring us happiness? We pick sort of intelligence and risk tolerance and all that stuff. Isn't geniality ultimately the best trait you could possibly have? That if instead of like you, I have to sort of work hard to not bristle at every one of these things and kind of contain myself. If I didn't have to work that hard, it just came naturally to me. That sounds great.
Yeah, I think it's right. I would call it character, not geniality, but wealth is a full person project. I would say the most interesting thing I found in the research around people who become wealthy, really wealthy, is there's this myth, this Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders myth, that every billionaire, every very wealthy person, by virtue of them being very wealthy, crawled over other people and is not a very good person. And unfortunately, it's cemented by a small number of exceptionally wealthy young men in technology who, through a lack of immaturity or idolatry of innovators, don't acquit themselves well, in my view. But the majority of wealthy people are high character people, because the only way you're going to get really wealthy that I've seen is if you collect allies along the way. You want to be the person that's put in a room of opportunities even when you're not in that room. Oh, wait, they're looking for a position at this firm I just met? Lisa would be so good at this, and I love Lisa. I want her to do well, and I'm going to follow up. At Google, they did a study, and they found that when they put out a job opening for product management, they get 200 CVs. They pick 20 to come in and interview. And 80% of the time, the one person that they pick out of that 20 is someone who is being referred and championed by someone internally. Someone who walks into the head of hiring and says, trust me, I know this guy, I know Bob. I trust me, he's fantastic, great guy, really good, really hardworking. Oh, you know him personally? And you're willing to vouch for him? Then we'll hire him. So the bottom line, one of the things, you want to get a job, you want to be always in a room of opportunities, you need to be very social. And two, the thing that really fucked me up was that I just made the assumption that I wanted to be two things. I wanted to be rich and awesome. That was everything I wanted until the age of 45. I grew up with no money. Very early, I looked around and I'm like, I thought I understood America, and I'm like, I am very committed to making money. And I assumed everyone else just wanted to ride off my awesome coattails. I had very little empathy. I wasn't very kind. I wasn't a bad person, but I wasn't thinking about people. I also made the mistake of having this scorecard. And the scorecard was amongst my girlfriends, my ex-wife, my business partners. How much am I getting from this relationship relative to how much I'm contributing? And the problem is that you will naturally inflate your contributions and accidentally diminish theirs. And there will be deficits where they are not contributing. And there'll be deficit periods where you are not contributing. And if you have a scorecard, you are guaranteed to, at some point, be really disappointed and angry in this relationship, express your disappointment and anger. They might be at a bad point in their life, and the whole thing begins a downward spiral. The fastest way to snatch financial victory from, the fastest way to snatch financial defeat from the jaws of financial victory is divorce. When I got divorced, I lost 60% of everything literally overnight, because split the assets and then another more expensive to maintain two houses, you're a forced seller at almost inevitably the wrong time. I'm not suggesting you stay married no matter what. I'm not suggesting that. What you also have, if you have a smaller or medium-sized business that comes flying apart and it's a good business and you can't figure out why it went down so fast, it's almost professional, always professional divorce. It's partners that don't appreciate each other, that aren't generous with each other. So unless you bring forgiveness, love, and generosity to a relationship, personally and professionally, you're not going to be that successful. So what I did, and it really kind of liberated me, I put away the scorecard, and I thought, all right, what kind of dad do I want to be? Right? What kind of friend do I want to be? What kind of husband do I want to be? What kind of business partner do I want to be? What kind of financier do I want to be? What kind of investor do I want to be? And I have this is the kind of person I want to be, and I don't measure anything. The only thing I measure is myself. Am I being this person? I'm not suggesting I put up with, I don't get abused or anything like that. At some point, you got to walk away from anything. But put away the scorecard. And it's also in your own personal relationships, it's really nice to say, I would like to add surplus value. I think about the difference, I'm trying to figure out the difference between a boy and a man, right? is that cultures have all sorts of things that are supposed to signify when a boy becomes a man. And it's usually some sort of religious ceremony or some sort of physical feat. And I love Richard Reeves' notion of surplus value. And that is, your whole life, maybe even many of you up until this point, you've absorbed a lot of love and care from your parents and your community. You've absorbed a lot of education. Some of it's state-funded. You've absorbed a lot of benefits from being born in an amazing country. When you become an adult, I think, and by the way, I'm using the term masculine a lot. I think that masculinity is a social construct. I think a lot of women demonstrate fantastic masculinity. I think a lot of men demonstrate fantastic femininity. I don't think these are sequestered to people born as one gender or the other. But I think it's important to embrace both wonderful attributes of gender and celebrate them. But I think when a boy becomes a man, is he gets to a point where he's loving people more than they are loving him. He is producing more tax revenue than he's absorbed. He is protecting more people than have protected him, right? He's influencing more lives in a positive way. And if you can get to that sooner and think, you know what? My goal is to be a better husband sometimes than my wife is to me, right? My goal is to be a better business partner sometimes, maybe most of the time, than my business partner is to me. That's kind of liberating. You just put away the scorecard and you're not disappointed. Because my biggest failings economically have been character failings. Not assuming the best in people, getting angry, flying off the handle, getting into wars with my venture capitalists, not being as kind and as forgiving and expecting more from my relationships than I perceived that I was giving. Put away the scorecard. It's liberating. And the most successful people I can ascertain have one thing in common. They're empathetic, and two, they're generous. They're generous. In 35 years in business, I have never been sued nor been sued. And I feel like I've been treated poorly a few times, but I decided I'm just not going to work with them again. Warren Helmet, one of my mentors, taught me that. And then when I got really angry, and I struggle with anger, and I thought, I really want to serve these people a cold lunch. I am pissed off. Another one of my mentors, a guy named Hamid Moghadam, who's the CEO of Prologis, called me. And I got into a war with Sequoia Capital, the most powerful venture capital firm in history. By the way, awful people, just FYI. Awful people. Still working. Anyways, and I'm like planning all this shit and how I can call every entrepreneur in their portfolio companies and tell them what horrible people they are. And I have this communications thing, and I hired a publicist, and I'm just about to go nuclear. And Hamid calls me and he's like, you really want to register revenge against these people? You really want to serve them a cold lunch? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, okay. He's like, sit down. He said, meet me for lunch. And I'm laid out, and I'm thinking we're going to redraw the maps of the world, and he's on board, and I'm about to get my bloodlust itch scratched with this plan to take down Sequoia Capital. And he's like, Scott, this is what you're going to do. The best revenge is to live a fucking amazing life. Be successful. Find people you love. Find people that love you unconditionally. And he's like, that is the best revenge. Take all of this energy you have on seeking revenge and put it into your work, put it into your relationships, and that shit just begins to shrink. And when they find out about how happy and successful you are, they will hate you. And it'll be upsetting to them. That's your revenge. And I constantly try and remember that. And I want to be clear, I'm not that spiritual, I still work on it. I had this person come after me a few weeks ago online while I was on vacation, insult me and my colleague Jonathan Haidt, and said that we were grifters, creating a moral panic, and that we didn't care about children. And I lost my shit. And I did a company-wide meeting. This is how we're responding to her online and offline, and I'm going to send a letter to the editor of the newspaper that this person works for. I had my whole strategy laid out. And something I have learned to do is I never do anything in isolation. I called a team meeting, and I said, this is what I'm thinking of doing. What does everyone think? And I have a lot of young people in my company, and all three of the young people said, Scott, why are you playing into the algorithms of social media that you claim are terrible? Why are you getting caught up in this rage cycle? And then one of them goes, Scott, look at your life, look at hers. What the fuck are you doing? And right then, it was just like, they're just so right. And I keep preaching these things, but sometimes it's really hard to read the label from inside of the bottle. In sum, anyone does you wrong, ask yourself, okay, is this a relationship that I've committed to? Because I love the saying, the key isn't to get the apology, it's to forgive the perceived debt, right? And then 2, if someone really does you wrong, just, again, serve them a cold lunch by just having an amazing life. And I'm still working on that, but I find that generally speaking, really successful people don't spend a lot of time trying to seek revenge. They just spend a lot of time trying to make their own lives really amazing.
All right, we're going to open up to you guys. First question, this lady right here.
Do I have to be official with the microphone? I guess I'll be official with the microphone. Oh, thank you. Sorry.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name's Savannah Enright. Anything else you want to know?
Whatever you want.
I'm a freelance consultant.
Great.
And I've started a couple of businesses myself, usually by myself, which is actually the topic of my question for you.
Yep.
You have started multiple businesses with multiple partners, and you have mentioned on multiple platforms that it's more fun to do with others.
Yep.
Your relationship with Kara seems amazing.
Yep.
So I'm curious, what should one look for in a great partner, a business partner?
A
'Cause
business partner?
I think you covered romantic partners in your last book.
Yeah. Great business partners should just have entirely different strengths than you. I think someone who's different than you. My first partner, a guy named Ian Chaplin, a total introvert, really good at technology, very anal, very just sort of like, the two of us used to have to present because we started a strategy firm, and he would almost throw up and die when he had to present. But he had, he had his meals on a spreadsheet, and I mean, he was just so different than me, and would travel with every charger known to man, just that kind of guy, right? And I thought, I need this guy around me, and he needs me. So I would say someone who has different strengths than you, someone you have some level of affection for, so you can forgive each other. You're talking about Kara. Kara called me today, and she's like, you got to tone down the Gaza shit. Or, she was just upset. And I naturally it's something I'm passionate about. I naturally reared up and started getting defensive and angry. And I'm like, she likes me. I know she likes me. I know she cares about me. I just need to take a beat and kind of accept it. It's nice to work with people that you can develop some level of affection for, because the most rewarding thing, raising kids with someone is really, really rewarding when it goes well. And building a business with someone, and you can also get a lot of this from the people at the company, it's just so rewarding when it works. It's like, I talk about my mom a lot in the book. I used to, every time something good happened to me, I used to call my mom. Literally every time. Because you can brag to your mom. Oh, Mom, I just got into Berkeley. Or Mom, I just got my first bonus. Or Mom, I just met this really nice woman in the line at Starbucks and I got her number. I would literally call my mom. And then now that my mom's no longer here, it's strange. It feels as if nothing great really happens because it doesn't get cemented. When you do shit in isolation and you don't share victory with people, it kind of, I think, at least for me, it's like it doesn't happen. Inevitably, if I ever get upgraded to this massive fat suite at a hotel, I know I'm alone. And it's like, who cares? Who cares that I have the triple bathtub and a view of the skyline and a butler waiting outside to rub my feet if I ring a bell or something? I mean, if there's someone not there with you, it just doesn't, it's like it doesn't happen. So I think building companies with partners, and I think it's so rewarding. It's really, we're mammals. We're supposed to do stuff with each other. Anyways, you didn't ask that. Find someone that's different than you, that you think in a way you could develop some sort of fondness for. I wouldn't pick partners where you immediately kind of think, I wouldn't really want to hang out. You don't have to be the same person or the same background, but do you think over time I feel like I could develop a nice bond with this person? But someone who complements your strengths, different strengths than you.
Thank you. Oh, hi. My question is, so I read the blog last week about the war against young people.
Yep.
And I'm kind of like, I got the book, and I was like, okay, I'll focus, and I'll be stoic, and
Yep.
I'll diversify, and it'll take
Yep.
a long time. And I'm like, good plan, like, let's do it.
Yep.
But then I read the blog about how the kind of like deck is stacked against people who are young. I'm 23, and I was kind of like, well, what is the point of any of that if like the sort of economic winds are in your face if
Yep.
you're young? And my question is sort of like what's the plan? Like if if shit is working against you in a lot of ways, like we have the algebra, but like how do you kind of get over the, I don't know, pessimism maybe about that?
Yeah, understood. So do you have a college degree?
Yeah.
From
From
an elite,
NYU.
from an elite
Shout out.
college?
Yeah.
Oh, so you have an elite college degree. Do you feel physically and emotionally healthy?
Personally, yes.
It's others that are worried about you? Okay, so you're in the greatest city in the world. You're young, you're healthy, and you have an elite college degree. You're gonna be just fine. The people I'm worried about. So I just did this. By the way, I'm gonna name drop a lot because I'm desperate for your affirmation and deeply insecure. I was just in Vancouver. I spoke at TED for the first time, and my talk was called "The War on the Young." I think the intergenerational theft from people this age transferred to people our age and older is absolutely criminal. We used to spend $1 on children for every 3 we spent on seniors. Now we spend $1 on children for every 8 we spend on seniors. My tax rate for the last 10 years has been 17% because I can take advantage. I buy and sell. I start companies. I get shares in small businesses. And then if I sell the company, I get something called 1202, where the first 10 million or 10 times the initial investment is tax-free. So when I sold my last company, L2, the first 10 million was tax-free. Most of you don't know that. You're not familiar with that. Rich people are familiar with it, right? I invest $2.5 million in a bankrupt company, less than $50 million in assets, almost goes through the valley of death, got sold 9 months ago, first 25 million tax-free. Does that make any fucking sense? Does that make any sense? The person here making 160 grand pays $9,000 a year in Social Security taxes. The person making 1.6 million, right, pays $9,000 in Social Security taxes. Our tax rate goes up and up and up. And the weird thing about our tax rates is it's actually the workhorses that are most screwed. People who make between 100,000 and $1 million a year in current income. You get, from a job. It's all reportable, and if you live in a city like New York, you might start paying 40, 45, 50, 53% tax rates. But if you live in a low tax state, like me, Florida, and you make all of your money from buying and selling assets, your tax rate plummets. So the workhorses end up absolutely getting screwed, and the very, very wealthy see their tax rates plummet. COVID was nothing but, in my view, a transfer of wealth on epic proportions from young people to old people. Okay, we have to flood the market with stimulus. All right, I understand the rationale. We're going to pump $7 trillion into the economy. 85% of it was saved. It wasn't like, oh, thank God I'm starving or I can't make my rent. 85% of that $7 trillion was saved. So where does that money go? It goes into the market, either housing or buying a house, or stocks. So stocks went crazy. And the myth is that a strong market, high stock prices, and high real estate prices are a good thing. There's 2 stages in your life. There's investing and there's harvesting. Almost everyone I see in this room is in the investment part of their life, ideally. Ideally, you're finding something you're good at. Ideally, you have the discipline to spend less than you make, and you start investing in a house. You start investing in stocks. While you're investing, you want the markets to crash. You want to buy assets as cheaply as possible. The reason I am financially secure is that in 2008, we bailed out the banks, but we didn't bail out the economy. So guess what happened to the stocks? as I was coming into my prime income earning years and getting, dusting off my pants from the great financial recession, I was still making a lot of money. I got to buy Netflix at $12 a share, Apple at $8, Amazon at $8. Netflix is at $600, right? Apple's at 180, Amazon I think is 150 or 160, because we let the markets crash. But what happened in COVID was the government decided, well, 1 million people dying would be bad, but boomers losing money would be tragic. So let's bail out the baby boomer owner of a restaurant. When you bail out the baby boomer owner of a restaurant, all you're doing is robbing opportunity from the 26-year-old graduate of the Brooklyn Culinary Academy that wants her shot. How the hell do you buy real estate in Brooklyn or buy stocks right now when everything is artificially pumped up with $7 trillion that was financed on your credit card? That was the most massive intergenerational theft in history. Why on earth are we transferring $1.4 trillion a year from the young to the wealthiest generation in the history of this planet, senior citizens? I'm not suggesting we do away with it. Neither of us should get Social Security. That's insane. And why does it happen? Because the people that make these decisions, our elected representatives, are a cross between the Walking Dead and the Golden Girls. And if I sound ageist, I am. And you know who else is ageist? Biology. So does Speaker Pelosi, whose first child was born when Fidel declared martial law in Cuba, and only 1/3 of houses had color televisions, does she understand the challenges a 17-year-old girl who's getting messages on Instagram about extreme dieting tips, who's 5'9" and 95 pounds, does she really understand those technologies? Does she understand the temptation of a gambling app to a 23-year-old man? Does she understand the challenges a single mother is facing? These people are so insanely old, but guess what? The $34 billion child tax credit doesn't make it into the infrastructure bill. It gets stripped out. But you know what made it through no problem? The $95 billion a year increase in Social Security through a cost of living adjustment. Two biggest tax cuts, and then I'll stop here. Two biggest tax cuts: mortgage tax interest and capital gains. Who owns homes and stocks? These guys. Who makes their money from current income and rents? You guys. It's literally, we've stopped investing in young people. The average 70-year-old is 72% wealthier than they were 40 years ago. The average person under the age of 40 is 24% less wealthy. And so young people aren't having kids for a variety of reasons, but one of them is economic. In 1990, 60% of people aged 30 to 34 had at least one child. That number's now 27%. Is it because young people have all of a sudden decided they hate kids? They can't afford them. They can't afford them. 55% of people our age feel extremely proud to be American. It's 18% people under the age of 25. And every day it's speedballed by, you are constantly thrust in your face images of how well everyone else is doing but you. So I can understand the rage. I think it turns every cut into an opportunistic infection because young people are enraged. So social issues are important. I don't say that's fake rage. But the incendiary poured off every issue is that young people, for the first time in the history of this country, a man or a woman at 30 isn't doing as well as his or her parents at age 30. That is a fundamental breakdown in the social compact. We have limited disruption, which is a natural transfer of wealth from the incumbents to the entrants on your credit card. Let me finish where I started. At your age, with an elite college degree, living in New York, you're not the person I'm worried about.
Thanks. So jumping off of that, curious, how do you bridge the gap between public and private sector? To your earlier point, if I'm a well-educated person, it's not attractive for me to run for office. So if you don't have people who can represent you in a certain age gap, how can you change policy? Is it just going to be done through private sector going forward?
No, I hope not. Look, I think we need Final Five ranked choice voting. We need less extremist. I mean, this is Brad's whole thing, trying to move voting to the phone. We have minority represent. 80% of our senators represent less than 20% of the population. It must be an amazing job because they've all gerrymandered the districts into hard red or hard blue. Most people are fairly reasonable, but our elected representatives aren't fairly reasonable. They're either very far left or very far right. I also think we need government-funded campaigns. I think we should pay our elected representatives at least $1 million each so they don't try and feather their nest, and they shouldn't be allowed to trade stocks or go into work in the private sector for 5 years after they leave office. I like what Singapore does. It pays its elected officials $1 million a year so they don't just have to whore themselves out because they don't make as much money. So I think there's a bunch of things we could do to get more representative government. Right now it's minority rule. But yeah, I think it's, Andrew Yang gave the talk before me at TED, and this is his whole thing, and Brad's actually done a lot of interesting work here. But I feel like I need to end on a more optimistic note here. Resilience, okay. Thank you. You my wife? What's going on here? Anyways, what I'll finish with is, he said resilience. I think the key, and we talked about this a lot, I think the key to success in this economy is your ability to endure rejection and resilience. And this is something you also find in all successful people, and that is your ability to mourn and move on. The only thing I can guarantee all of you is that you're gonna have a lot of love in your life. You're also gonna have a lot of tragedy. And your ability to get through that tragedy, you will lose a job. You will have investments go to zero. Some you love a great deal is going to get sick and die. And successful people have the ability to mourn and move on. Key to my success has been rejection, specifically my ability to endure rejection. In high school, I ran for sophomore class president, junior class president, senior class president, lost. And then based on my track record, decided to run for student body president, where I went on to, wait for it, lose. It never really got in the way of my confidence, right? It never really got in the way. I applied to 9 schools. I got into 2, one off the wait list. I just have never been afraid of rejection. I've had 9 companies. Only 1 out of 7 companies is successful, so I started 9. And I had 2 that were successful. And by the way, that's all you need. If you want to score above your weight, if you want to punch above your weight class, professionally or personally, you have to be willing to put yourself in an uncomfortable position. And supposedly my wife was going to stop by, so I'll tell this story about her. When I had an apartment in South Beach when I was younger, and I went to the Raleigh Hotel. They had these DJ parties on Sunday. And I walked in, and I said, I saw someone that I was very drawn to. And I said, I'm going to speak to this person before I leave. I promised myself I'm going to speak to this person before I leave. And it's not easy to approach a strange woman under the midday sun without the benefit of alcohol. It's just not easy when she's sitting with another woman and a guy. It's just not easy. And I'm like, I need to get home. I'm going to go home and watch The Sopranos. I'm dating myself. And I bombed out of the Raleigh Hotel. And I got near the cabin. I'm like, I promised myself. You told yourself you'd do these things. So I bombed back in, and I went over to these 3 people, and I said, where are you guys from? Anyways, long story short, 2 years later, our first son's middle name is Raleigh. If you want to score above what you deserve, you want wealth that's greater than the average GDP. If you want a person who's incredibly high character and is more attractive than you, that's kind of what we all want, right? Someone who on a balanced scorecard is just very impressive. You better be willing to take an uncomfortable risk. The world loves people who are willing to get out a spoon and eat shit. My thing in entrepreneurship is I will call clients over and over. I will call people who don't come to work for me back and try and convince them to work for me. I've never been scared of rejection. I've always been able to look in the mirror and go, you are the answer to a firm's problems. You are going to make someone else a lot of money if they invest in you, and you're going to make someone really happy. You have to surround yourself with activities and people that give you that confidence such that you can endure rejection. That is the key to success, your ability to mourn and move on. And here's the thing that helps me. We're going to all be dead soon. So anyone saying no to you, anything you do that embarrasses you, embarrass yourself, or you feel public humiliation, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. You want to squeeze as much juice out of this lemon called life, and the way you squeeze is by taking uncomfortable risks. That's it. That's it. Bradley, thank you for this.
Firewall is recorded in my bookstore, P&T Knitwear, located at 180 Orchard Street on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. We'd love to hear from you with questions, feedbacks, or idea for a guest. Just email me at bradley@firewall.media or find me on LinkedIn. And to keep up with what's on my mind and my latest writing, please follow my new Substack at bradleytusk.substack.com. Thanks again for listening.